conscious of your goodness and mercy and graciousness to us. And we put before you our petitions now, confident that you always hear us. So let's pray first that the Spirit will be with each one of us personally and keep our minds and hearts open to new inspiration and insight. Let us pray. And I would invite others to offer any prayers you care to.
I'd like to pray for a young mother of two small children who is dying right now. We pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer. Lord, hear our prayer. And we offer all of our prayers, as always, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, welcome to everybody. We've been doing this a lot of years, it seems, and some of you have gathered in the past, and some are here for the first time, and so I hope everyone feels comfortable and welcome. We have only a few fixed spots throughout the day. We're going to try to eat at 12:30, lunch, and then have Mass at 5. And for sure be done by 6, no later. So those are the fixed spots throughout the day. There's going to be a lot of silence time or quiet time, reflective time. You can do whatever you want during that time. There's rooms open in the building here that you're welcome to use. Any doors that are open you can go into. There's the staff dining room, the door isn't open, but everyone's welcome to go in there. And there's a conference room, there's a library over here, there's a meditation garden out here where, and I don't know if the weather's going to warm up or not, but there's people can go outside. There's folding chairs if you want to take those out with you. So we just hope that it's sort of a relaxed day. I figure that most people gathered here are busy people and harried in one way or another, or pressured or whatever, and I'm hoping today is sort of a relaxed time. I hope that I can stay relaxed throughout the day, not hyper. I must finish this material. So I'm hoping we can have a relaxed day like that, and people can use it any way that you want. And there's certain places where you can easily take a nap, and there's a couch in the back there and so on. So I feel free, use the building anyway. I think there'll be snacks available throughout the day, and lunch at 12:30, as I said. And we'll have Mass in here at 5. We're shooting for 5. Well, what I'm interested in today is the whole idea of spiritual growth and the exercises that might help us achieve that. So those two focal points probably need more discussion. So spiritual growth can be described in many different ways. I want to try to look at it in various ways. One is in terms of Trinitarian form. You do have handout. I'm probably not going to go in the order of the handout, but most of the stuff I'm saying will appear someplace or another in there. But I begin with the sort of a Trinitarian notion of what it would mean to grow spiritually. And that would mean, and that's always a nice framework for thinking about spirituality as Trinitarian. So I would say that what we're after in our lives is to do a better job of doing the will of God. Now, how you discern that will is another story, but to say, I'd like to be in tune with God's will. I'd like to be like Jesus, who came to do the will of his Father. I would like to hear God calling me in my conscience and be ready to follow it wholeheartedly. So that would be our relationship with the Father, to do the will of the Father. And then always our Christian spirituality is Christocentric. It would mean how do we put on the mind of Christ? That's a notion from Paul that I like a lot. How do you put on the mind of Christ? How do we think more like Christ thinks, or see the world more like Jesus did? Act in a way that's in accord with him. Be a better disciple of Jesus. Try to imitate Christ in the way we live. So that would be taking the second person of the Blessed Trinity, the Word made flesh, and seeing how we can sort of see the world through his eyes. So it would be almost like automatically. So if one is in a situation, am I going to forgive this person who hurt me or not? The impulse of Jesus would just take me over and say, well, of course I'm going to forgive, or of course I'm going to try to forgive. That's just the way I naturally live, because I've sort of put on the mind of Christ. St. Thomas Aquinas said that when we've acquired virtue, then being good is easy. That's what we're after, is to live spontaneously, to be able to follow our own intuitions. And the more they're shaped by Christ, the better off we are. Carl Rogers said that mature people are able to trust their intuitions, that the way we just naturally respond to a situation, the way we ordinarily behave, turns out to be good in accord with the gospel. So that spirituality isn't like grit your teeth so much. It is to get in tune with that mind of Christ and the will of God. And you can do it in terms of the Spirit as well, that we become better vehicles of the Spirit. Our fundamental belief is that we are inhabited by the Spirit, that as we go deeper within ourselves, we're going to find that Holy Spirit. St. Teresa of Avila was really good at that, talking about the interior castle, that the growth in the spiritual life was to go closer to the center point of what we are all about, to move into the interior of the castle. And when you find the interior of the castle, there you find the Holy Spirit. And then we're living out of the power of the Spirit. We're empowered by that Holy Spirit. That Spirit becomes our guide, and that we become better vehicles of that Spirit. So that's a Trinitarian framework for thinking about what we're about today. and what we would be trying to do in our lives, responding to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Let me try that another way. I'm going to try to say a whole bunch of ways in which we would be thinking about what spiritual growth is about. Let's try it in terms of conversions, where we would say that spiritual growth is to be converted in the various dimensions of our lives, so that when we look at ourselves, we see ourselves function. We're bodily creatures. You know, we have emotions. We have an imagination. You know, we live moral lives. We're intellectual creatures. We're religious people. All of those are dimensions. It isn't usually, like I'm spiritual on Sunday and then physical when I'm in the gym on Tuesday or something. Those dimensions are always interacting in us. We're always physical, emotional, imaginative, moral, intellectual, spiritual creatures. So one way of thinking about this idea of spiritual growth, personal growth, is to say, how would I move forward in each of those areas of life, each of those dimensions? And it provides a framework, again, and that's what I'm trying to show you, our various frameworks to guide the reflection that we're going to do today and what we're all about. So in this case, what we would be looking at is saying, in each of those dimensions, where can I make progress, or how does the Spirit call me to make progress? And what is even more important probably becomes is how those dimensions interact. So let's say we start out with the physical, and we could say that, that I need physical conversion. That means that I have to understand my bodiliness and its importance. So we're people who hold to the incarnation. We say God took on bodily form. We say that God created the material physical world, that God created our bodies, so that our bodies now become temples of the Holy Spirit. And our bodiliness is absolutely crucial to our spiritual growth. And so attending to the body becomes part of spiritual growth, of eating properly, of getting proper sleep, of doing exercising, and so on. Now, a lot of people say, well, what's that got to do with the spiritual life? Well, traditionally, we've always seen that, the body roots it all, that the healthy body is important for the spiritual growth. So we cannot just, do away with that dimension. So part of spiritual growth has to do to attending to ourselves physically. And then we are also emotional creatures. So we're the people who find joy in looking at a grandchild, or that we get angry when we're hurt, so that we are emotional creatures. And a part of spiritual growth is to be able to mobilize our emotions in a positive direction. That usually means naming our emotions properly, knowing maybe being able to distinguish between anger and resentment. To get more subtle about the way we're able to name our emotions. Not just I feel bad, but I feel in some specific way that things are out of sort. So to name my emotions, and then to be able to mobilize them, to use them constructively, to do good, help others, find energy for my own progress in life. So we need an emotional progress or transformation as well. We're also imaginative creatures. We carry with us an image of self and an image of God, just to take two examples. Our imagination is extremely important to us. It's in our imagination that we're able to see how we could be better. I'm here now in this stage of the spiritual journey, but where would I like to be? And what would it be like to be a holier person? So how do I do that? That's the gift of imagination. I began to imagine, how would I like to be? What kind of a person would I be? How would I interact with people? How would I think of myself if I was healthier? And then you can combine that with thinking about the image of God. who is God for me, and have I developed in any way who God is for me since I was in grade school or high school or when I was younger? How is my image of God developed? So to grow spiritually would be to say we were getting a healthier image of God, a more comprehensive image of God, one that encompasses more of our experience. It would be part of the way we would think about spiritual growth. And then we need to grow morally. We need to be people who act on principle rather than expediency. So I'd have to ask myself, well, where are my moral faults? Where are the areas in which I'm not guided by the Spirit or doing the will of God? What is my sins? What are my sins? And what are my habitual patterns of sin? And how am I going to make progress on all of that? And then we are intellectual creatures too. That's part of the dimension that we have to deal with. So part of spiritual growth has to do with understanding our faith at a deeper level, of learning how to apply it more systematically and critically to the culture in which we live. And so that's one of the great things in life. It always interests me when I meet older people who are intellectually alive, who still read or study or learn or still think that they don't know it all, that they could learn more, and they want to understand at a deeper level. That's a great gift, to be intellectually curious, be intellectually searching. So if we're going to grow spiritually, that's clearly a part of it. We have to keep reformulating our faith, reinterpreting it, refocusing it so that it is relevant for our daily lives, so it's making a difference in the way we live. And then we are religious creatures. That is that we have the capacity to look at a tree and say, thank you, Lord, for the beauty of nature. We're the people who can see our friends and appreciate them and say, God, what a gift they are to me. We're people who are able to feel our dependency and say, I'm not in charge of this world. And that's probably a good thing, because there's somebody else who is more wise and compassionate and forgiving and understanding. We call that one God. That's a good thing, that there's a God who's above us and to whom we are accountable. So we are religious creatures. We have the capacity for mystery, for transcendence, for something bigger than we are. There's a power higher than we are. Religious people understand that. And religious people understand that it's good to pray to that God and to ritualize that relationship by worship or sacrament or whatever. So in all those ways, we would see what spiritual growth is all about. And it's a very good framework because it shows a systematic way of working at it. So what everybody could do is to say, well, where would I start out of those dimensions? Where would I begin in the process of spiritual growth? And what is it? Is it my emotions that always get in the way and I haven't named them and mobilized? That's what I need to work on. Or maybe if I was in better physical shape, then I would manage life a lot better. So what I better start to do is work on diet and exercise and sleep. So you could look at any of those and say, well, where's the starting point for me? That's a great spiritual wisdom, is to know what would be the best single dimension for me to work on right now if I want spiritual growth. It's a great framework for thinking through all of this. Let me try it another way to think about a frame for spiritual growth, and that would be to say, think of it relationally. Spirituality has a lot to do with relationships. And so I could begin to say, well, how am I going to improve my relationships with other people? Who are the people that bug me or hurt me or I can't get along? and how open am I to those that I love, to have a reciprocal relationship where there's a mutual exchange of energy that goes on. How would I be more attentive to the needs of the people that I interact with in life, colleagues at work, friends, family members, acquaintances, so that I would be good for them rather than somehow harmful, that I would give them more energy rather than siphoning it off from them. I could think of that relationship then as well to self. How do I relate to myself? What parts of me are estranged? What parts of me are not yet under the sway of the Spirit? What parts of me don't respond to the call of God, are not in tune with my fundamental direction for God? Let's say I want to be for God. I want to move in that direction. But parts of my personality, my character, my life get out of order. And how do I get those parts in this movement towards God? Which brings me to the third relationship that is to God, obviously. So part of spiritual growth is always, how do I relate to that triune God? I think I said enough about that. I'd also say that in looking at our relationships, it would be the question of how do we relate to nature? Because eco-spirituality has become more and more important in our time. We understand that. We have to have a proper environment if we're going to survive. I mean, all the global warming talk is important to a comprehensive spirituality. So how do I relate to nature? Does nature speak to me of God? Do I reverence nature? Do I think of tending the garden as we were called upon to do? Do we see ourselves as stewards of the earth? How do I relate to that natural world? And how do I relate to the larger social world, the world of the university, the world of government, the geopolitical world? How much am I in tune with the need to work for justice if I want to have peace, as Paul VI said? How in tune am I with trying to transform institutions? So we are institutional creatures. How do I transform institutions? How am I a genuine peacemaker in the world? So that third set of categories has to do with relationships. And I could think of spiritual growth in that way. Again, I could say, well, where is the love that I need? The threefold love that the Scriptures talk about, love of God, neighbor, and self. Again, where would I start? It's probably going to be a key question throughout today. I mean, what's the starting point? What's the emphasis point? I suspect it'll be different for everybody in the room. That's why we're going to have quiet time for people to sort this out. But, if you took the threefold loves of God, neighbor, and self, and if you expand neighbor to being community and institutional as well, where would I start if I'm going to have spiritual growth? So some people might say, well, my big problem is I lack confidence, and therefore I don't do anything to make the world better because I don't think I have anything to offer. So where's the starting point? It's all with love of self. I have to learn to love myself. I have to see my gifts. I have to realize the talents that God has given me, limited as they might be. But that becomes, so where am I going to begin? Love of self. Somebody else says, well, my whole life is consumed with my relationships, and many of them aren't healthy, and work drains me rather than helps me to grow, so that's where I have to put my effort. Other people might say, well, I have to pray more. And my relationship with God is crucial. But there again, we see in that each of these frames suggests strategies. Each of the frames suggests starting points and how we would move forward in trying to grow spiritually. Let me try one more, which is going to structure some of what I say today. And that is a classical framework for spiritual growth that it talks about, words are hard, purgative, illuminative, and unitive. Now, let's try to transpose those into some sort of more contemporary framework. That the purgative way would say that if we're going to grow spiritually, we got to figure out what our attachments are that get out of order. What are the things that take up my time and energy that maybe shouldn't, that take me away from God or whatever? So that there's a purgative step in all this, of trying to identify the attachments and then making progress in saying, well, how do I keep from making an idol out of that thing? How do I relativize it? How do I get it under more control? So for some people might say, well, my problem is I'm attached to alcohol, and therefore my whole project isn't going to get anywhere of spiritual growth until I get to AA meetings, or until I begin to be able to manage that attachment so that I can get on with the rest of life. So the purgative way is identifying what the idol making an absolute out of something that's preliminary. And that's often hard to identify. I mean, it's often, well, I mean, for some people it's obvious, but I mean, there's a lot of subtlety that goes on in the purgative way. Let's put it that way. There's all kind of attachments that we can rationalize. Well, of course, I have to work 23 hours a day. Well, exaggeration. I have to work all these hours. I mean, otherwise the whole thing would fall apart. You know, the whole project is dependent on me. Therefore, I can't sleep properly. I'll be sleep deprived for the next year. You know, so that I'm so attached to that. I'm so convinced that nothing can work without me that I can't get away from that. And therefore it messes up everything else. Now I'm not sleeping enough, and now I'm out of sorts, and now I can't think clearly, and now I get diminishing returns on all my efforts and so on. All because I'm overly attached to my importance for the project that's going on. So, purgative way. The second we call the illuminative way, and if you're on the outline, and this is all expansion of number 1. Now, I'm still on 1 on the outline. If people were wondering where I'm at, and I'm on 1. Introduction 1, isn't it? Didn't it say something like that? Yes, that's what I'm on. Introduction 1 for people who are wondering. And people can figure out at that rate we will get to introduction point 6 by 5 o'clock. So, now I'm on the illuminative way. Again, I'm transposing this into a sort of modern idiom out of the classical formulations, but this suggests is that I become more enlightened, that I see things more clearly, that I'm more aware of what is really going on in my life and in the world. My intellect is illumined, and my heart is enlightened as well. So I don't want to move this out of all affectation or emotional side. So it is a kind of knowing that involves the mind and the heart, where I see more clearly. I see what the idols might be in my life. I see the importance of Christ. I understand how the Scriptures could guide me. I recognize the need for meditation and prayer. A lot of times we say that what helps us in the illuminative part of this process is the reflection, meditation. That's what produces the illumination. That's how we see more clearly, because we've stopped the busy cycle for a while. We've stepped back. We've analyzed, we've looked at, we've tried to understand it, we've tried to be quiet with it, tried to gain insight into it, make good judgments about what's going on. So this illuminative stage is tightly bound up with reflection, and it's part of presumably what would happen today for people, that there would be time to stop the vicious cycle of busyness that grabs many of us and be able to look at all of it more clearly. So that would be the illuminative way. And then that leads in the whole traditional spiritual practice to the unitive way, to what we've often called contemplation, where now we simply rest in God or have familiar conversation with the Lord. Now we're not thinking so much and analyzing. Now we're just resting in the Lord. We're present to God. We feel encompassed by the divine love. We feel that Christ, our friend, is at work in our very being, that we do in a deep way sense that power of the Spirit. We're united. It's quiet. It's peaceful. There's
have you ever tried to put yourself in the place, a particular story in which Jesus is teaching in the temple, and somebody comes in and says, your mother and your brothers are outside waiting on you, and you're standing next to Jesus now. How does he respond, and why does he respond in the way he does? And how do you, as sitting next to him, how do you take this? You know the gospel?
Yeah. I take it you want me to say, I thought you were going to say what it means. How did they get turned around? That's an important passage about Jesus' relationship to his own family. The story, I don't think the right setting is the temple. He's someplace else, somebody's house, I think. And but the point is that asked about your mother and your brothers are waiting for you, and he says, well, he puts that off and says, no, the believers are my mother and brothers and relatives. So I think that the significance is, it's actually quite a theme found in the Gospels where Jesus sort of plays down the blood relationships and says that the real family he's establishing is this new family of disciples, and that it's not based on blood relationships, it's based on faith in him. That's what we'll establish. Who is it that are my mother and my brothers and my sisters? Are those who do the will of God. So actually it's a very important passage. And it represents in the Gospels there's the idea that the family of Jesus didn't understand him. In Mark's Gospel, both his mother and his brothers come after him to take him back home because they think he's out of line, that he's not functioning properly. He's not, he's too much of a maverick. He hasn't stayed home and found a wife and pursued a career and all of that. So you get a tension in the Gospels between Jesus and his family. And the broader statement that he keeps making is that, no, what's really counts is doing the will of God. And that's what creates the new family. So he's about a new creation. So it's very important. But if you put yourself in the scene, you could, who knows what happens. You could say, well, maybe his mother was upset about this, or or are the disciples getting the message? But I think that's what the scriptural passage is about, and it's a universal message. And it has, it opens up the whole thing of, well, this community of Jesus is open to a lot of people. The next step is it's open to the Gentiles. It keeps opening up, expanding outward like that, which is an important part of the gospel message, important part for us today.
Do theologians continue pursuing in their thinking, broadening the word brothers? How is that treated?
No. Well, you're into scriptural exegesis, but as a matter of fact, when it names Jesus as brothers, and it calls them adelphoi, which means in Greek blood brothers. It doesn't mean cousins or anything else. It doesn't mean relationship by faith. It means blood brothers. And it names 4 of them, and it names, which is interesting, and it says his sisters, plural, meaning at least 2 sisters that he had. Now those in Greek it's not cousins, it's not kindred by faith, it's blood brother. That's what the word adelphoi means. That's what the Greek says. Now, you can go 2 ways with that and say, well, he had 6 nice siblings at least. That'd be one way to go with it. Another way to go is to try to explain it away. If you're going to explain it away, the sort of obvious meaning of the Scripture, you might do something like this and say, well, the premise would be that our religion is a translated religion. You know, Jesus spoke Aramaic and worked within a Jewish milieu. And all the language is Jewish, the celebrations are Jewish, and the language is Aramaic. And what have we got in our Scriptures? Greek. You know, so what it tells you is that Christianity from the very beginning is a translated religion, and therefore you extend and say it's a translatable religion, meaning it could be translated into any culture at any time and in any language. Now, that premise could be, did the Greek get the Aramaic right here? That would be one of the questions. You could say that in Hebrew there's a broader word that would include cousins, broad words of relatives. If that was the language that it was portrayed in to begin with, and that maybe the Greek choice of Adelphoi is not accurate. That's possible. So you sort of got 2 choices once you know what the Greek is, to say, let's be glad Jesus had nice brothers and sisters. Or you can say the Greek might have got it wrong, and that he didn't have blood brothers, he had nice cousins like James, the pillar at Jerusalem. That's where that's going to take you, where that biblical scholarship is going to take you. But it really is crucial to see that Christianity is a translated religion. See, it's so different from the Quran. The Quran is in Arabic, and the angel Gabriel dictated it to Muhammad in Arabic. And they wrote it in Arabic. And that's the only thing that counts. So when our friends get up in the Christian, Muslim, Jewish dialogue, they begin by speaking in Arabic, because that's what's faithful to their tradition. Christianity is very different. Very different. It's translated from the word go in a very early century. So the first writings, probably around 49, that's Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians. And then the Gospels by 70, 80, 90, all translated. But your point, I mean, so it raises the question, is the translation, what did the translation do? Every translation changes something in whatever language you put it in. It does something. I mean, the nuances disappear and other nuances arise as soon as you put it into Ethiopian or into whatever, Slavic languages. Or as Matteo Ricci put it, into Chinese. It makes a difference. And nuances will be gained and nuances will be lost. Who had their hand up? Yeah.
I want to follow up on this. It's not about meditation, but I've wondered for a long time. So did Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, all those writers write in Greek?
Yes. Oh, they wrote in Greek, yeah. Yeah. And that's what we have extant. I mean, we got fragments back to about the year 125 and fuller manuscripts later in the 2nd century, 3rd century.
Why didn't they write in Aramaic?
That's a good question. I mean, very good question. I mean, the fact is they didn't. Paul, the earliest writer, it's always important to remember, he wrote before the Gospels. It's not like the Gospels were first, though. And Paul wrote in Greek on purpose, because that's who he was reaching out to. That's one thing. And also, if you look at the other Gospels, they needed to, even in Matthew's, which is the most Jewish of the Gospels, you have a Gentile audience in part. So that the evangelist had to write for their communities. And by that time, the communities included any number of Gentile converts.
And those people, for the most part, didn't know Aramaic.
Oh, they wouldn't know Aramaic. Oh, they wouldn't know Aramaic. Where, on the other hand, Paul would probably know Aramaic and know Greek. But no, the Gentiles had no reason, I mean, no Aramaic. That's an unimportant language to them in that culture. So this is a very important point about this, the translated character of Christianity from the very beginning. And it might be germane to the point that Dick brought up. It's entirely possible. But there's no doubt the Greek text says Jesus has got blood brothers, and we know their names. Well,
as our Muslim brothers expand beyond Mesopotamia, the rest of northern Africa, into Asia, into the Pacific Rim, are they running into the same translation problems?
well, they're much bigger on staying with the original Arabic. I mean, they're not going to let that happen. I mean, the only real version of the Quran that's, of ultimate significance is the Arabic version, the original, yeah. And so they fight against, the idea of translations having any normative value. They don't have any normative value for them. Whereas our Greek translation does. It's our normative scriptures. But they can't allow that. They don't allow that. They're much stricter on that point. That's the point. Remember, it's like I said, the parallel between Islam and Jesus is the Word of God and the Quran is the Word of God. That's the parallel, not with our New Testament.
What is the language of the Gnostic Gospels or the Gospel of Thomas and so on?
Yeah, I think they're largely in Coptic. They were discovered in Egypt. I think they're mostly written in Coptic. Those Gospel of Thomas and Peter and so on. Yeah.
Do they address this brother?
I think there's an assumption. I'd have to check. I'm thinking of I can't say that I can cite any text that says that. I'm not sure. No. Well, does anybody want to say what happened in their meditation? Whatever method, yeah.
Or, I ask something else about meditation.
Yeah.
This strikes me, so it just amazes me, like St. Benedict, who came up with this, what is it, Lectio Divina?
Yeah.
Okay, now people didn't read and write, the common person in those days, right?
Right.
Now he was just encouraging his
monks. Mm-hmm.
But then, like nobility, they could read and write, a lot of them. Is that correct? Then they weren't, nobody meditated except the monks and then the priests and stuff?
Well, no, I mean, that was the method he had to use he used it because they would have a public reading. And, he couldn't send them all away like we did today, take your Bible and go meditate. He was dealing with a concrete situation. He's got monks, and he doesn't have enough books, and a lot of the monks can't read them anyway. So what they do, they get together and somebody else reads it. Somebody who knows what it is reads it, and then you're encouraged to remember it. But no, other people could use any other kind of things. There are always people who had access to manuscripts throughout the whole of Christian tradition and who read them themselves and comment on them. That's just the method that he devised for his monks.
Well, I'm thinking of, say, a generation that even before me, they all tell me they were not encouraged to read the Bible.
That's right.
And
Catholics.
So now here we're getting encouraged to read the Bible.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That Catholics, there was a great fear as a result of the Protestant Reformation of private interpretation. And so there was a movement within the Catholic Church to say that to restrict the reading of the Scriptures to more public, official kind of events. And I think it's true. You could say that people, that it would be in our own memory that people were not encouraged to read the Scriptures. And of course, the Second Vatican Council in the 60s is what changed all of that. And what part of it was the dialogue with our Protestant brothers and sisters. There were Protestant observers at the council. They had an influence on what was going on. And part of that influence was a renewed understanding of the Scriptures. It wasn't just from the Protestant community, because as soon as you recovered the liturgical traditions and the older traditions of prayer and meditation, then it became clear that Scripture was important. So there were a lot of things that led into it, but what the Second Vatican Council ended up doing was talking about the importance of reading the Scriptures and meditating on them. So that's what's changed. And I mean, I used to say you could walk into a house and if there was a Bible sitting on the coffee table, you say, I'm in a Protestant home. Well, you can't do that anymore. Or if somebody says, I'm going to Bible study tonight, you used to say, well, they must be Protestant. Now they might be coming here on Monday night to Corpus Christi. So that has really come together. And that's one of the premises of what we're doing here. Is we need to see a whole lot of what I'm teaching today, I never learned in the seminary. In fact, I didn't learn anything about any of it in the seminary. It was never mentioned. There would be no... So, what did you have? A whole generation of priests who didn't know anything about, for the most part, about centering prayer for sure. And it depended on where you studied in terms of whether you knew Lectio Divina. And depended again where you studied, if you knew Ignatian style. But there were, I would just say that there were a lot of priests that would have very little sense of, by their training, of the options for meditation. It'd be clearest to me in the idea of mantra meditation or centering prayer. So that's why we're learning. That's why we need to learn more of the tradition. So much of the renewal, and this was Pope Benedict was so big in the renewal that he was active in the Second Vatican Council, and he saw the significance as what they call ressourcement. That is, his idea was you had to go back to the fathers of the church, to the early traditions, and that is what would help us renew the church. Whereas my mentor, Karl Rahner, saw, and I think Pope John the 23rd saw it not so much as ressourcement, going back to the original documents and so on, but as aggiornamento. That is how we renew the church in light of the contemporary world. That's why Rahner and Ratzinger were together and wrote a book together and on the same side of many debates in the council, but after the council, then it began to diverge between the aggiornamento people who were mostly interested, and I'd say John Paul II represented that much more than the current Pope, of how you engage the modern world. Whereas our current Pope is much more interested in the intramural things of the church and being faithful to those originating things, especially the teaching of the Fathers, Augustine, and so on. So it's a very different take on the council that's at work within the Catholic community. Anybody want to talk about meditation? Yeah, yes. We have one back here, yes.
Anyways, moving right along, I really tried with the Benedictine approach. But I'm not, I keep on finding myself intellectualizing. I'm not saying I'm intelligent, I'm just intellectualizing things. I'm still in that trap. Like I was in Psalm 86, and it really struck me, hear me, Lord, and answer me, for I am poor and oppressed. And I got to just intellectualizing instead of going about it the way that was.
Well, I wouldn't get too upset about that.
Yeah.
Reason is one of the faculties that God gave us, and there is a discursive side of that, as well as a more affective side. But I don't think that there's a big problem with saying, I could start to hear that in terms of cries of the poor and situation of people in Latin America, or Darfur would come to my mind. I could think of a lot of things that my knowledge of the world today or my reason would take me to consider.
Yeah.
I don't see anything wrong with it.
Well, I was way off on another tangent with that.
Yeah, well,
Okay, that's okay.
that was my own take. But I mean, whatever the it doesn't have to be a tangent. It can take you wherever you want.
Oh, okay. Well,
I don't think we have. My mentor at Oxford, John Macquarie, wrote a book on spirituality in which he thought of meditation as a form of thinking. You know, he had a very different take on this, that meditation could be simply a way of slanting the ordinary thinking we do. So we might think about Darfur and therefore ask God to bless the people there or to help the refugees there. You know, or you could think about how the blessings you've received in life and the advantages you've had and so on, and say, thank you, Lord. So he saw prayer as a form of thinking. Now that appeals to some people. Somebody said that earlier today, that they're characterizing themselves as being more rational and intellectual and so on. Go with it. I don't think we should fight ourselves. There's a way in which our nature guides us and our personality. That's why, Jerry was pointed out to me that one of the quotes from von Balthasar was about never get caught up in a particular method or don't get caught up in a particular technique and so on. And I would translate that as there's no one preformed way to pray. Prayer is to lift our minds and hearts to God, to be in union with Christ, and people do it different ways. If your intellect, your reason helps you move in that prayerful direction, why not? Yeah, follow up, yeah.
I just want to say, I did that one, and the parable of the rich fool who bought, bigger barns.
Yeah.
I just want to say that it was good because even though it was intellect, I got something entirely different out of it that I never got.
You want to say what that is? You don't have to.
Maybe some other time.
Yeah, right. Fine.
Something different.
Yeah.
But I had never
Well, that's good. I mean, that's
come back in what you said earlier. Now you got to. A good way to do it is to test it.
Yeah. Right, yeah. Yeah, I gave you a chance to test it in the group here to see, but you passed that up. But but I mean, that would be an example of saying, well, is this weird or what I came up with? And then you'd probably get people thinking of it in various ways and so on. But then you can do the testing yourself. Does it sound, what you came up with, does it sound like the gospel? Does it sound like what Jesus intended? Right. So if you came up with it and said, yeah, every rich person I know is going to hell because they build bigger barns, and then you say, well, that doesn't sound like Jesus, or it doesn't sound like the Christian tradition. You can test it yourself when you come up with it. Well, you can do it by yourself. But you raise an important point. Whenever we have an insight like that, it needs to be tested in some way, which would be a good segue into the next segment, maybe. Let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, Carol.
I don't know if it was in the year 2000 that I first learned about these, but I know it was during one of your talks. But I didn't think I went back all the way to 2000.
To 2000.
I have really enjoyed applying some of the ideas of the Ignatian type of prayer meditation. I have about 3 to 5 different scriptural scenes that I use depending on, I guess, what the mode is or what my mood is. And my latest one that I really enjoy is I think I've shared with you, the Transfiguration. And I just picture, Jesus saying to me, he doesn't want the big hoopla like Peter wants to build a tent and have all this fanciness. And the Lord is saying, just to be quiet, and to be silent, and doesn't need all this whoopla, and so to speak. And I picture myself and him holding hand in hand going down the mountain. Because I know I was at one talk and Dr. Gallardi had given an interpretation of the Transfiguration, and he was talking about how it's wonderful to be in all that gleaming glory on the mountain, but eventually you have to come down off the mountain. And that really made me to think more about this passage. And I see the Lord, we're holding hand in hand, and I really like to get into the grass, and there's flowers, and it's a beautiful time of day, and we're just having a wonderful time, he and I, and a lot of quiet moments where I try to listen to what he's telling me is the next step on my journey.
Thank you, Carol. Great example of what Ignatius wanted to happen. It's a perfect example of what Ignatius was hoping would happen. You move into the scene and something different happens, so the Lord grabs Carol's hand and they walk down together. You got to take the peak experiences, live them out in the valley. That we guys always remember that when we walk in the dark valley, to remember the truth that we knew when we were on the mountaintop. It's a wonderful notion. That's in the tough times, not forgetting what we knew to be true at one time. I'm thinking of Margaret Files' lecture about Oscar Romero. That was his favorite passage, or the one that he used over and over for his own meditation on the Transfiguration scene. Well, that's wonderful, Carol. Thank you. I am going to move to the next segment, which is liturgical prayer and getting us prepared for Mass at 5 o'clock, so that what we're about today is talking about how are we going to achieve greater spiritual growth, how we're going to cooperate with grace to do that, and we're looking at spiritual practices, right? And we looked at the practice of fasting, which we broadened out to say I'm fasting from whatever attachments get in my way of being a good disciple. So I'm trying to purify and purgation process. I'm doing that. Then we looked next at the second step of the whole idea of illumination, trying to understand better. So we saw 3 methods of meditation, of ways that we could achieve this greater illumination, understand the mystery better. Each of them are sort of either discursive, like we were hearing before, or more affective works. And now I'm at the liturgical approach. That's so that baptism, Eucharist, the 7 sacraments are all spiritual practices that can bring us closer to Christ. So I want to put it in that category because it would be easy for people to say, well, you've been talking about spiritual practices, now we're going to talk about institutionalized religion that's got nothing to do with spirituality. So I want to overcome that by starting out by saying, and we'll make it concrete, saying the Mass, the Eucharist is a spiritual practice. That's what it's about. It's not just a ritual that we go through or an institutional element that's part of our faith. It is a spiritual practice. That's what it's got to do, bring us closer to Christ. And in fact, I could link it with the contemplatio, the contemplation, where we're talking about union with Christ, and say, well, that's what happens in the Mass, is that we have this union with Christ in a very real sense. So I could follow my purgation, illumination, contemplation schema that I was using to guide us, and say we move to liturgy, to Eucharist, and we get to that close personal relationship with Christ. That's what it really is all about. So we could do this with baptism, confirmation, the other sacraments. We could do it with the sacrament of penance. Some of my notes suggest that that would be possible. But I think I'm going to stay with the Eucharist as being the spiritual practice that we want to look at to see how that is going to help us grow personally and spiritually. That's where we're at. So as I'm doing with the other things, that I want to do that theologically, see what the Eucharist is in a way, so that it can begin to we can see then how the practice could be improved, or how we could get more out of it. So that's where I'm at in this whole approach here. You realize we could then go on to other spiritual practices like almsgiving or acts of charity, which are spiritual practices as well. Or we could do the stations or the rosary, any number of other things that are spiritual practices, and always seeing how they meet our needs and how they help us to grow personally and communally. So, when we talk about the Eucharist, I first want to talk about the centrality of it. And now this becomes a very Catholic thing to talk about, because there's a way in which in the Catholic tradition the Eucharist has a centrality that it doesn't have in the Protestant traditions. Has it in the Orthodox Christian world, but not so much in the Protestant world, although that's gaining. So when we say in the Catholic tradition the Eucharist is central to us, it is what shapes our imagination. And that's a really important way to see it.